Okay, everybody, here we are for episode 67 of Now Showing with Mike and Wayne. This is our third straight episode, back to the way we used to do it at the very beginning over the phone. The reason my air conditioning went out, so I felt, Wayne probably wouldn't want to be as hot as I am right now. So hopefully by next week, we will be in person again. For a very special episode of Now Showing with Mike and Wayne. This week,
sounds bad. My internet is out, so I am very limited on what I can watch and what I can research. So it's a double whammy this week. So we're going to call an audible, run the option left, and hopefully we'll get blocking downfield and get this episode into the end zone.
Exactly. And what Wayne means by that is he was unfortunately not able to watch the two movies that we were going to review this week. So we will be pushing those to next week. And we will just be talking about the topic and a bunch of movies, some that you guys have heard of, some that you haven't. Hopefully we'll give you some good recommendations for this Halloween season. We are going to talk slasher films. That is one of my favorite genres, one of the few genres that Wayne will watch because he doesn't mind those as opposed to a lot of other scarier movies. It's just one of those, obviously everyone knows my favorite horror movie at this point is Halloween, which is a slasher. And it's kind of like the mother of all slashers. Technically, Black Christmas started it in 1974, but I would say Halloween made slashers popular and is the responsible, even though it came out in 1978, it was responsible for the 80s slasher boom that we had. Now, since not everyone is as well-versed in 80s slashers, Wayne and I, we both grew up mainly in like the 90s. We're going to stick to mostly 90s slashers, but we're going to start off with probably, I would say, my second favorite horror movie, if not tied for first of all time. And that is one of the most perfect slasher films that I've ever seen, and that is Scream, directed by the late Wes Craven, starring Neve Campbell, David Arquette, Courtney Cox, Skeet Ulrich, Matthew Lillard, Rose McGowan, written by the wonderful Kevin Williamson, who this will not be the first movie we bring up of his on this podcast, on this episode. And he also, Wayne talked about Dawson's Creek. He wrote that as well. So Kevin Williamson, for those of you that don't know, was kind of like a staple for us in the late 90s, Wayne, wouldn't you say?
Oh, yeah. Huge. I mean, something that I love, something that you love. I don't know how you feel about Dawson's Creek, but I definitely recognize and appreciate Scream for everything that it is and has done. Mm-hmm. But, yeah, Kevin Williamson in the late 90s, I don't know if there was somebody, I'm sure, I don't know. I can't think of anybody more influential.
Especially as a writer. Like, he was never a director, He was a writer. Usually writers aren't that popular.
Yeah.
So, to be a writer, to create a show as massive as Dawson's Creek, to have two hit movies come out back-to-back years, well, like I said, we'll talk about the second one coming up, but to have Scream come out. Now, so when Scream came out in 1996, the horror genre was kind of left for dead, in a way. And we were looking for, as fans, we were looking for something that was going to grab us, that we were going to gravitate to, kind of spoke to us. It was written very 90s. It had lots of very 90s dialogue. If you're a movie buff, it had lots of movie buff dialogue, so that all that kind of spoke to me. I don't think I'm out of line saying this. It revitalized the horror genre at the time, and it made it, obviously there were plenty of rip-offs, but when your movie is that good, that's going to happen. Just if you go back and look at Jaws in 1975, you're going to see a slew of shark movies from 1976 all the way to 1990. These things last for a while, and it started something again, just like I talked about Halloween started something. Scream started it as well. It started another slasher boom. In a more meta way, though. It's very self-aware, Scream is. So, for those of you that don't know what Scream is, well, first off, why the fuck are you listening to our podcast? Second, I'll give you the plot. So, Sidney Prescott is a teenager, and her mother died almost a year ago. She was murdered. She saw it happen. She fingered this guy named Cotton Weary. He's in prison. That's the plot, basically. So, how it starts is we meet, and everybody at this point knows this. The beginning of Scream includes one of the biggest actresses at the time, right, Wayne? Wouldn't you say?
Oh, yeah. Huge.
So Drew Barrymore was on top of her game back in the mid to late 90s. And when they went to her, so I'll give a little backstory before I get into what happens here. They went to her for Sidney Prescott. You know, she's a big star. They wanted a big star for their movie. And she read the script, and she told Wes that she wanted to play Casey. And Casey is the character who dies in the opening of the movie. Everyone was kind of shocked by this. But they're like, you know what? If she wants to do it, well, let's let her do it. And it you know, when the movie came out, you better believe they used her to promote the goddamn movie. Drew Barrymore's face was everywhere. I mean, she's on the cover. She's on all the posters. And she's in the movie for all of 10 to 15 minutes, if that.
What is interesting about that, thinking about the time period, 1996, Friends, the mega hit TV show, is probably at the height of its popularity or reaching the summit of its popularity. And, you know, Courtney Cox is in this movie. She's one of the 6 friends. And I'm surprised that they didn't, now again, I might be dating myself and I might be incorrect, but I don't remember them promoting her as much as Drew Barrymore, just the height of everything. And I understand comparing the two, it's not the same at all, but just with as wildly popular as Friends was, am I wrong in not remembering that campaign?
No, you're right, because you have to remember back in 1996, no matter how popular Friends was, TV was always looked down upon. So if you were a TV star trying to be a movie star, it was always negative. So they didn't use her as much to promote the movie. When we look at Neve Campbell, Neve Campbell was also on a TV show. So you get these TV actresses who are your leads, and then kind of weird, goofy David Arquette, who's never been like a lead actor. And then you have Drew Barrymore, who's a lead actress at that time, and all over the place. You know, you have the Letterman interview and just all this stuff that she's always in the public eye. So they just used her for that advantage, you know, and it worked. It got butts in the seats, and then it shocked people. And that was what was great about it, is you didn't see it coming until you went and saw the movie. Now, after the movie, it inspired so many openings like that. Obviously, Scream did it every time they did a movie, but other movies started to do it. They would get lead actors to be in their movie, and then they would kill them off 5 to 10 minutes into the film. So that also became a trend for a while. You know, at the time that I saw it, I remember I was like 13. I probably should not have seen it in theaters. Maybe I was 13 or 14 years old. And I went with my buddy. I think my buddy Jeremy, I believe. We went and saw it on the weekend, and I fell in love with this movie from the beginning. I know I'm all over the place, and people are gonna be like, "What's the plot of the movie?" So, but that opening scene is one of the main reasons I think a lot of people fell in love with this film. You have a great lead actress who doesn't make it very far into the movie. You got plenty of gore, plenty of intensity and scares, and just kind of overall slasher nastiness in that first 10 to 15 minutes of that movie. And it just sets up the tone for the rest of the film. Even with some of the humor. There's some humor in that first scene, too, that they play with a little bit. So you kind of get the idea that it's going to be more of a dark comedy, which it is. So a lot of people like to classify it as a horror comedy. I wouldn't go that far, but it definitely plays with humor within horror films, I think. And go ahead.
I have to ask, of all the great one-liners, which one is your favorite?
I've always been drawn to Matthew Lillard's character, Stu, in the movie. So I think, and it's towards the end, but it's when he's on the phone with Sydney, and he's like, "Did you really call the police?" And she's like, "Yeah, you're fucked," or what, something along those lines. Like, "My mom and dad are gonna be so mad at me." It's just great because it shows that spoiler, Stu and Billy are the killers. If you haven't seen, again, Scream's been out for this is the 25th anniversary. Sorry, that's what happens. You take your big bad killers and you kind of humanize them a little bit too, even though you're about to watch them both get killed. In that moment, you realize they're still teenagers, even though, of course, it was the 90s. They looked like they were 40. but they were teenagers. So it was a lot of those kind of lines that really stuck with me. Do you remember the liver line?
Refresh my memory.
I heard they found her liver in the mailbox. They should just leave her alone. Get it? Get it?
Now, this
Also
one may not even be from the movie. Let me run this one by you. What's your favorite scary movie?
Yes.
Showgirls.
Showgirls.
Totally frightening.
that I don't believe was from this movie.
Was that one of? Is that maybe two, or is that like? And I know what you did last summer type thing.
It wasn't. I just watched that one, so it wasn't that. It either may have been Scream 2 or it may have been like Scary Movie or something. Because you gotta remember that they got they spoofed Scream in that. No, this one the opening is what's your favorite scary movie, and she says Michael Myers, and then that's when what gets her boyfriend killed is not knowing the killer in Friday the 13th Part 1, which is Jason Voorhees' mother, not Jason Voorhees. A lot of people forget that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, there are so many great one-liners. There's just great sequences. There's her on the phone in her first catch with Ghostface when she talks about how everybody in a horror movie is stupid. There are girls that are blonde with big boobs that run upstairs instead of running out the front door. Well, she tries to run out the front door, but it's locked, so that she turns around and runs upstairs. There's just a lot of meta moments in this film. Another great scene is Henry Winkler when he's the principal, so his death scene is really cool, and he scares himself like 4 times within the scene. Also involves a Wes Craven cameo as a janitor named Freddy, who's wearing the Freddy Krueger sweatshirt while he's mopping the floors. Just so much, I have so much love for this film. I could talk about it for hours. Like I said, it inspired so many other movies in this genre. Kevin Williamson's writing is just on point in this one. It's like I said, I've said before, I never call a movie perfect. I always say it's near perfect, because I'm sure there's always ways that something could be a little better. There's some scenes that you think about, you're like, I didn't like that scene as much. But most overall, like this movie, there isn't really a bad note in this film. Jamie Kennedy, I didn't mention him. He is great as Randy, the movie nerd, which was back before that was me. I saw this movie, but I basically became him. So luckily I'm still alive, and I get to stay around for the sequel, just like he did. And well, I wasn't going to touch on the whole franchise, but since we're not reviewing anything this week, I personally am a fan of Scream 2, 3, and 4. I get that they're not nearly as good as Scream 1, and I would totally agree. But I think that the franchise was able to maintain quality for all 3 sequels, even the 4th one, which was years later, and ended up being Wes's last movie before he passed away. But Kevin Williamson came back to write that one. I thought that one was real clever. It was way more meta. It was because now you're doing a meta movie when we know what meta is. So you get like Courtney Cox in the movie saying that it's all so meta. So that was nice that, when they made the first 3, you get a bunch of modern dialogue, what's the word I'm looking for? Pop culture stuff. So they kept that alive in Scream 4. The opening to Scream 4 is really cool because it's like 3 movies within inside each other, Wayne. So you have like, because remember, Wayne, do you remember in Scream 2 Omar Epps and Jada Pinkett went to go see Stab, which was a movie made based on Scream?
Yes, I do. I do remember that.
So in Scream 4, they're up to like Stab 7 or 8. So they do like 3 or 4 openings, and they even do the one Stab movie that they're actually watching. It has an opening within an opening. So it was really interesting. And they got like Kristen Bell was in one of them. They had some other famous actresses in the other opening scenes and stuff. So that I thought that was a really cool idea. So the whole franchise, to me, I know we know people that don't like the whole franchise, but to me, it's probably one of my favorites. There is a new one coming out with the original cast in 2022, like in January. Very excited for that. So somehow, if you have missed Scream and you feel like you don't need to watch it because you've heard about it or whatever, watch Scream. It truly is one of the great horror films. It, like I said, it revitalized horror films for a period of time, and just brought in a whole kind of what we have today in horror is because of Scream, I think. Just like we got to Scream because of Halloween. Oh, I also want to talk about, there's an entire like sequence at the end of the movie that they're basically mirroring with one of the murder scenes in Halloween. So as a Halloween fan, that's awesome. And it just shows Wes recognizing without Halloween, there is no Scream. And I think that was very respectful to John Carpenter. I think that they were friends. I'm not sure 100% on that. But that was a very nice like touch to throw Carpenter that love. Like, hey, you started it, and I'm just taking the mantle and running with it. Because that...
Well,
oh, go ahead, sorry.
This is a case where imitation really is the most sincere form of flattery.
Yes.
We talked about how shot-for-shot remakes are kind of a waste of time, much like the Psycho movie.
Yes.
Or the Psycho remake. This was like an homage, if you will, or just like you said, like a mirroring of a fantastic kill scene in Halloween.
Yes, which
and I really love and respect the way that it can be used and reincorporated without completely ripping off something.
Yes,
you know?
well, it's them watching, because what it is too in the scene, it's Randy watching watching Halloween as the killer is behind him. I don't know if you remember that scene, and Randy's yelling at the TV, "Turn behind you! He's behind you!" as Ghostface comes up behind him. So it's just the whole, again, like you said, homage to that scene. And plus that we get to kind of watch both scenes play out at the same time was just really cool, I think.
Your description right there reminds me of the 40-Year-Old Virgin when they're watching Day of the Dead, and the one sales guy's like, "Bitch, get out the room! Bitch, get out the room!"
Yeah, that's exactly it. Which in Scream 2 they do with Jada Pinkett when she's yelling at the screen, and then she gets murdered. That's another thing too. I like that they kept that part of the franchise alive. Each Scream movie had celebrities get murdered in the very beginning. The third one they used to tie into the story, and the third one it's Cotton Weary, played by the always wonderful Liev Schreiber. He becomes more of a main character in Scream 2, and then they kill him off in Scream 3 as the big star opening. And instead of going for a big star, because he wasn't a big star at that point, they went for a big star of the series that killed him, and then that kind of starts off that movie.
But it totally worked regardless, even if they strayed away from the big star kill thing. I think it totally worked.
Oh, it did. It totally worked. It was perfect. Again, because you just don't... I think the only thing that sucked about the sequels is after they did it in the first movie, then you go and see the second one with Omar and Jada, you're like, oh, well, they're going to die. And then you go see 3 with Leah, and then you're like, oh, there's Cotton Weary in the opening scene. Shit. This isn't going to end well. So, I mean, again, and I know I've just kind of been just babbling on about this movie for 20 minutes now. But that's how much I love it. I got to rewatch it this week, so it was nice to revisit that movie. And it's nice to revisit. I've decided I don't know why I don't watch it more, so I'm going to definitely be watching it every Halloween season. There's just so many movies that I like to watch. People know this about me, and I just like to watch as many as I can, a lot of new ones, a lot of old movies I haven't seen. But yeah, this one, a high recommendation for me, and I know, Wayne, you had talked that you really liked it as well before, so I think a high recommendation for both of us.
Yeah. So for somebody who wants to watch it but doesn't have the DVD, is it streaming anywhere right now, or do you know?
Give me 1 sec here, I will tell you. I'm not sure. Scream movie.
If it's not streaming right now, Redbox is always your friend, guys. So
a couple let's see. Yeah, Redbox, or you could if you have AMC, it's free with cable TV. You could rent it on Apple, Vudu for $2.99. If you have a Philo, Fubo TV, or a Sling TV subscription, it looks like it's there as well. You have to do a little bit of kind of research to find it. They'll pop up on Netflix every now and then, the first 3. So it's just... but yeah, I think it's part of the So if you have AMC, I don't know if it's on AMC Plus, but if you have AMC, it's on there because they're playing it as part of their month of October. So definitely you can check it out there. Let me go. So I want to move on. We're going to move on to the next one, which is also Kevin Williamson, which we kind of alluded to. This one a lot cheesier, I would say, but fun movie. Again, a great like kind of 90s cast. I'll tell you right now, it's called I Know What You Did Last Summer. If you have Peacock, it's on there. You can actually sign up for a free subscription to Peacock, and I believe it's part of the free subscription. So you'll get commercials, but you can watch it there. I Know What You Did Last Summer, directed by Jim Gillespie, starring Jennifer Love Hewitt, Sarah Michelle Gellar, Freddie Prinze Jr., Ryan Phillippe, Johnny Galecki, who I didn't even realize he was in this movie. I forgot. It had been a while since I'd seen it because I just rewatched this one too. Again, written by Kevin Williamson, so very 90s. The dialogue is kind of whip-snap, very Scream-esque, if you will. This one was based on a book, so it wasn't an original idea. But it kind of plays itself... I mean, it's not... It's like Scream in tone, but they don't go and like kill someone famous in the beginning of the movie. They don't do a lot of the things that Scream did. But the tone of it, the fact that it was Kevin Williamson, the fact that you had Jennifer Love Hewitt, who I believe her and Neve Campbell were on the same show, weren't they, Wayne? Weren't they both Party of Five?
That's a very, very good question. That sounds right.
Let me look it up since I know your internet's out.
I know that I frequently get Lacey Chabert and Jennifer Love Hewitt.
They were both on that show together, though. That's why you get them confused.
Right. No. Yeah. Jennifer Love Hewitt was the girlfriend of one of the brothers, right?
Yes, and I think Neve Campbell was a sister.
Yes.
I think.
Yes, Neve Campbell and
Lacey Chabert
were sisters.
Okay.
Oh wait, no. Who was the fifth?
Who was
We're getting to a Party of Five debate now.
This has turned into a Party of Five podcast, everybody.
Because I mean, Scott Wolf and Matthew Fox. I always thought that was odd that they were both on the show and brothers. Wolf Fox, ha ha ha.
Yes.
And I remember Campbell and I remember Lacey Chabert. They're also siblings.
All right, so let's get this out of the way. The main characters were Scott Wolf, Matthew Fox, Neve Campbell, Lacey Chabert, and looks like Scott Grimes, maybe? Let me see.
Okay, that works. Boy, this podcast is turning into a real...
Here, I got the cast member's name. Yes. Or no, sorry, Paula DeVeek. So I don't know who she is, but she's got the same last name as the rest of the people. And then Jennifer Love Hewitt, yeah, she was seasons 2 through 6. Anyway, so they both come from Party of Five. So you got the TV actresses. That was a long, round way to this. Sarah Michelle Gellar from Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Freddie Prinze Jr. was just kind of starting to be in movies around that time. At this time, he did not bring Matthew Lillard with him. There's a running joke I have with myself, really, where every time Freddie Prinze Jr. would show up, Matthew Lillard was also there. But apparently they just wanted to do similar movies at first, and then they started teaming up together. Ryan Phillippe, this was like kind of peak Ryan Phillippe. He wasn't a TV star. He started in movies. He was in stuff as a young kid, but then he did Cruel Intentions right around this time. I'm not sure if it was the same year or not, but him and Sarah Michelle Gellar obviously played together in that one. So I Know What You Did Last Summer is one of those movies that starts off, it's like a college graduation party. They're drunk. Freddie Prinze Jr. is driving Ryan Phillippe's car, and Ryan Phillippe's being a dick. He spills beer all over him. Freddie Prinze Jr. can't see what's on the road, and they hit somebody. And instead of being what you should do in this day and age, or in any day and age, calling the cops, they decide to take the body and roll it into the water by the dock. Lo and behold, the guy's alive. They freak out. They actually push him into the water. Ryan Phillippe goes to retrieve the crown that Sarah Michelle Gellar's character won, and then he loses that underwater. And then we fast forward a year later. and they vowed never to talk about it again. And we go a year later. Jennifer Love Hewitt is at college. She's coming home for the summer. Her and Freddie Prinze Jr. broke up. Sarah Michelle Gellar was supposed to go to New York. She never did. She still lives in the town. Ryan Phillippe is like a popular college football player, whatever college he went to. And then Jennifer Love Hewitt gets a letter that says, "I know what you did last summer." And so she starts to freak out. She goes to meet Sarah Michelle Gellar so they could talk about it. They then go to Barry, played by Ryan Phillippe, who tries to like play it cool, like, oh, no one's gonna do anything, and they think it's somebody. They go to beat him up. They threaten him. That's where they run into Ray, played by Freddie Prinze Jr., who no one knew where he was for a year, but now he's working on the fisherman boats, just like Johnny Galecki's character. And it's from right there that we realize that a guy in a fisherman's coat and boots and has a hook is going to murder people as he murders Johnny Galecki. Not really for any reason, because he had nothing to do with it. That's where this movie lost me back in the day, Wayne, was like Scream had a plot that made sense. There was like a kind of a revenge thing going on, and everyone that was involved was kind of at least knew each other. Where like this one, so again, I'm going to spoil here. It's been out for this one 24 years. It's The Fisherman. That's the other issue I had with this movie is like the guy just didn't die, and so he came back and started killing people. They never really explained why. I guess that you could argue that his daughter dying, so he was like mourning her death. And there's the possibility that he killed her boyfriend who was responsible for the car crash that killed her. So he may have just kind of lost it and became a murderer and took it out on the people that left him to die. My issue with it...
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Wayne.
No, you're right. It's like, there's no real like reason for it. It's just like, yeah, well, hey, trigger, murder, death, kill, take that. And I felt that way, especially in Traffic, but...
Yeah. And I really like this movie. It's a really fun movie. I enjoy watching it. One of our friends, Andy, frequent guest, posted, I think, that he, as cheesy as it is, he loves this movie, and it's one of his favorite cheesy movies. And it is. It's very cheesy for some of the reasons we just mentioned there. The acting is not the greatest, I would say. The dialogue's pretty good, though. I would argue that maybe the actors weren't, because most of them haven't gone back and done horror, with the exception of Sarah Michelle Gellar, that much, because maybe that's not something they wanted to do, or they did it just because they knew it would be popular after Scream. But it doesn't earn the fisherman being the killer, because it usually, like in Scream, it turns out to be two characters that you grew to know. In a lot of other slasher films, that's the case. The killer is, even if it's not someone that you know really well, it'll be like, oh, it was the janitor, or it was this guy. He literally is in no other scenes in the background that where you go, oh, that's who that was. Like you're waiting for that kind of like Scooby-Doo moment. Funny enough, because you got two people from Scooby-Doo in this movie. The other one was in Scream. You're waiting for that moment, and then when you get to it, like, oh. Like, I remember the first time I saw it, I was like, who is that? And then then they like tell you, like, oh, so it's the fisherman? Like, he just didn't die, and then he went on a murdering rampage? And you're like, yeah. Like, oh, okay, I guess. Like, it didn't have that same effect that when you find out Billy and Stu are the killers in Scream. In this one, you're just kind of like, oh, all right, well, it was still fun to see people die, I guess, which it was. It's pretty brutal.
They kind of have to, they just kind of like, here it is. Like, whereas with Scream, you kind of like, hint at it and you figure it out because they're there. It's not like, it's like, it's subtly obvious, where this is just like hand, face.
Yes.
If you understand.
Well, Scream, it's just kind of, it peels it away a little bit at a time. Because there's also the fake out, too, where they pretend Billy gets stabbed. So then you're like, oh, well, it's not him then, the first time you watch the movie. Where, like I said, this one, there is no peeling away. It's just they drop it right in your lap, and you're like, who the fuck's that guy? And you're just like, all right, well, I guess he's the killer. which then made for a really strange sequel because apparently he still survived being thrown into the water, and then like hunts her and Freddie Prinze Jr. down to some island in like Hawaii or something,
right,
or Jamaica.
And then is it the second one where like they're older and married and have a house and
something
Freddie
like
Prinze
yeah,
with the electric toothbrush and
it's Brandy Mackay Pfeiffer, and then Jack Black plays a guy with dreadlocks and a bad Jamaican accent for some reason.
I don't care what you say. Jack Black makes everything better for me.
He does. It's just it was an odd choice. You could have just had him play a pot dealer that did do that, because I think that's all he was. Is he was like the drug dealer.
Yeah.
So watching the first one again, I forgot like how brutal it was. So I do like that aspect of it. I like the brutality of it. It's just the story. I think for me, kind of like I said, it lost a little bit of luster with that reveal at the end. But it's still a fun movie. There's definitely some good kills, some good moments, some good screaming. The one thing I did notice too, Wayne, is Jennifer Love Hewitt screams a lot in that movie. It could be like, someone accidentally like bumps into her and she's like, ah! Like, lady, you need to calm down. Everything will be okay. Maybe not. You might die, but still, you need to calm down.
At this point, shut up.
Yeah. But yeah, so if you haven't seen that and you want to check it out, it's definitely, I think, worked its way into the lexicon of 90s slashers and one of the better following Scream. I won't say follow-up because it's not a sequel, but better movies that came out after Scream, because there are a lot of real duds that came out as well. All right.
Who was? I'm gonna jump in here and which is the most satisfying character death for you in any of these slasher movies? I say that because I wanted to bring up House of Wax.
Yeah, and, I wanted to talk about that one. Yeah.
When Paris Hilton's character finally gets it, it's just so satisfying for me because I was so just done with all of her and her antics, and yeah, man, I don't mean it to sound cruel. It's just like there was something about it. It's like, yes.
Well, at the time too, because like she's kind of had a turnabout where she's like more well respected now than she used to be, because we're kind of over. I think a lot of people realize like there was a lot of slut shaming going on back then with her, and maybe it wasn't as completely fair as everyone thought it was back in the day. But you're right. At the time, we were so overloaded with her and Nicole Richie that it felt like a relief, because you're like, not only were you overloaded with them, but then it's like, hey, guess who's going to be in House of Wax? Paris Hilton. And you're like, oh, Jesus Christ! Like, why? Why is she now invading my horror films? She's already invaded my personal life. Now she's invading the horror films. Like, what's going on here? And then you get to see the moment. You're right. It's such a satisfying death. For me, just out of the two movies we talked about, the coolest one in, I think I Know What You Did Last Summer, and I didn't even remember it, was Johnny Galecki from Big Bang Theory and Roseanne. He gets a hook underneath his jaw, and then he gets pulled across the table. Like, that was a pretty cool death scene.
Absolutely brutal.
There's one that we'll have to, once you're able to watch movies again, because I did watch the movies we were supposed to review. There's a good one in that, too. But Scream, I probably would say the most satisfying one, and I love the character, but it's satisfying in a way because it's also humorous in the way he dies, is Stu, played by Matthew Lillard, because he gets the TV thrown on his head, and then his body electrocutes. Like, that was probably the most satisfying death from that movie. The most brutal is easily the beginning with Steve and Casey, especially if you can watch the director's cut or the unrated version, where when they gut Steve, they cut to it and all his organs fall out. But even without that, the Casey scene, she gets stabbed and then they hang her from the tree. Like, that's pretty brutal. And it was great because it lets you know what you're in for. Like, yes, you're going to be entertained, but at the same time, you're going to be grossed out. So those two, I would say, from those three, I would say, from those two movies would be ones that I think about a lot, often, if you will.
You fantasize about them a little bit? It's like, I wish I...
You son of a bitch. No, that would be weird, Wing. Another, and I'm not going to talk too much about it, but another 90s one that I think followed a lot of the same tropes, Urban Legend, with Alicia Witt and Jared Leto, Rebecca Gayheart, and what the hell's his name? Freddy Krueger. Robert Englund is in that as well. So that one's a fun one. I just rewatched that one somewhat recently. I think it was last year for the 31 Days of Horror. Danielle Harris is in that one as well. She's kind of like a horror icon at this point. That one is, people die in the way of urban legends. So you just think of any urban legend, you heard a guy with the hook hand, that's kind of one of the main ones. And it also has Michael Rosenbaum from Smallville. A lot of good deaths in that one too. So if you haven't seen Urban Legend, again, these are, if you've seen Scream but you haven't watched a lot of the, I don't want to call them rip-offs, but the movies that are inspired by Scream. Urban Legend, I Know What You Did Last Summer are two good ones. Cherry Falls, which I talked about last year. Take it back to the early 90s. Dr. Giggles. Have you seen Dr. Giggles?
Not in the movie that you're talking about, sir.
I'm trying to think what kind of other movie that would be. A lot of giggling going on. So one of those fetish movies. So 1990.
Don't judge.
No judgment here, Wayne. Judgment-free zone. 1992. So we're going to take a jump back. So this is pre-Scream. This movie was not rated well at all, but this was probably one of the first slashers I saw that made me just interested in the genre. And it's a movie about a guy who's raised by a crazy person, his dad's an evil doctor, and then so he grows up to be an evil doctor. It's played by the late Larry Drake. Dr. Giggles is the character's name, and he fucking murders a lot of people. People show up to the house oh, that's a scary house, and he's there waiting and he kills them. I feel upset that we never got a sequel for this movie because it's one of those trashy 90s slashers. I think that's become a cult classic. He giggles before he murders people, so it's kind of super weird but super fun all at the same time. It's a really interesting flick. I got it digitally finally. I wasn't even thinking about it. And I think last year I noticed on Amazon Prime that it was $5, and I was like, wait, what? Dr. Giggles is available digitally, and I don't own it already. So now I do, and it really is just as trashy and fun as I remember. It's not what I would call a good movie, but it's one I really, really enjoyed. So if you haven't seen that one, definitely check out Dr. Giggles. I did want to talk about, let's see, you mentioned House of Wax, Wayne, so let's talk about that one for a minute. Because that was so House of Wax kind of continued the idea of Scream, but in the mid-2000s. So I think it's close enough maybe to say that it was still inspired by it. It's a remake, but from what I understand, I don't know that the original is not very slasher-like. This one is very much a slasher. It came out in 2005, directed by Jamie Colette Serra, written by Charles Belden, Chad Hayes, and Carrie Hayes, based on the story by Belden. The film stars Alicia Cuthbert, Chad Michael Murray, Brian Van Holt. Those are a lot of other TV stars. Paris Hilton, Jared Padalecki, John Abrahams, and Robert Richard. It's a loose remake of the 1953 film of the same name. Itself a remake of the 1933 film Mystery of the Wax Museum, which I did not know that. Plot. Siblings Carly and Nick, that's Chad Michael Murray and Alicia Cuthbert, along with their friends Wade, Paige, Blake, and Dalton, are on their way to a football game. The night before the game, they camp in a field. A stranger in a truck arrives, then leaves. When Nick smashes one of their headlights, the next morning, Wade discovers his car's fan belt is broken, and Carly falls into a large pit of roadkill. After rescuing her, the group meet Lester, who drives Carly and Wade to the nearby town of Ambrose for a new fan vote, while the rest head to the game. Obviously, they don't make it to the game, if you're wondering. So they go to this small town. It's like the whole town is like no one's there, right, Wayne?
Yeah, it's like a ghost town, basically. It's like, what the heck is going on here?
So I believe it's Jared Padalecki. He's the first one, I think, that from Supernatural that doesn't make it, I believe. He wanders into the museum, right? And he's then killed and then made into a dummy.
Human, if you will.
Yes, a human dummy. Or wax sculptor. Sculptor? No. A wax statue? I don't know, whatever. I can't think of words right now because it's hot in here.
Wax guys.
What?
Wax guys.
Wax guys. Coming this fall. NBC. That actually sounds like it might be a porno.
I did not even think of that one. Hello.
So it then turned into basically like your typical slasher where Alicia Cuthbert and her brother Chad Michael Murray, they're the two main stars. So their goal is to basically survive the night. There's lots of good kills in this one. It's another one that wasn't very well reviewed, but I think it's pretty good, especially if you were a fan of horror in the early to mid 2000s. We did not get a lot of good stuff. So like 13 Ghosts, House on a Haunted Hill, Ghost Ship, all those movies are looked at more fondly than they were when they came out because that time period had so many awful films that they just kind of are the ones that survived. They were good enough, and they've kind of gained audiences, I think, since then. So you kind of look as House of Wax is almost like not a classic, but it seems like it should have been a popular movie back in 2005, but I can tell you it was not. It just was, like I said, I think it's a product of the time and the fact that when you look back at that time in horror history, there wasn't a lot of good stuff coming out. It wasn't until we got closer to the tens that we started to get some really good like indie horror, some more thought-provoking stuff, some thought-provoking slashers. Another one I'd like to talk about too, and I've talked about it before, is The Guest from Adam Wingard and Simon Barrett. Pays a lot of homage to John Carpenter and Halloween. It involves a guy who comes back and says that he is a friend of this family's son who died in the military, and that he wanted to tell them that he was great, and so he stays with that family. But it turns out he's just some like crazy guy that escaped from some military was involved, like some military prison camp or something, where they do experiments on people.
Interesting.
It turns into a very like 80s style slasher film where this guy just kind of goes on a murderous rampage. It's awesome. I love that movie. I can't believe I didn't even have it on my list, but that's definitely like a modern day slasher I think people should watch. And again, is very meta, so it's very self-aware, just like Scream. It reminds me a lot of Scream, or like I said, a lot of Carpenter, mainly because of the music. And I feel like the guy, The Guest, is a lot like Michael Myers because he's very hard to kill. So yeah, that's another one I think people should take a look at. I'm trying to think of anything else, really. I'll just mention the rest on my list. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Wayne.
What are your thoughts on the end of the 2000 remakes for Nightmare on Elm Street and Halloween? I know we've touched on these in the past. Since we're on the topic,
sure,
let's just refresh people's memories in regards to those.
So, Halloween, we talked about last year when we did a big episode about the franchise. I liked Rob Zombie's Halloween at the time. I watched it again recently within the last year or two. Not as big of a fan as when I watched it the first time. I did not care for the second one, even though I've been told I should rewatch it through a different lens, and that people say it's actually better than they remembered. But I have not done that yet. Now,
right.
Friday the 13th, that came out. That's the last movie we got because it's been tied up in legal battle ever since. In 2009, Friday the 13th came out, and it did really well. $50 million opening weekend, but then the second weekend it tanked. I really like that version of the movie. It takes 1, 2, and 3 and combines it into one film. I enjoyed that aspect of it. It's brutal, I think, which is something I really like. and it's very gory. It has a great cast, Jared Padalecki in that one as well.
Yes. What's interesting about Friday the 13th and The Killed especially, because when you think about, like, just thinking right now, it's like the slow, methodical creeping.
Yeah.
This one, Jason's like running at people and they're like zooming in. It's like that opening scene where he slaughters the campers.
Yes.
Like, holy crap, it's intense.
It's intense. It's brutal. It's a little. You're right. It's a little different. It's Marcus Nispel who actually did the Texas Chainsaw remake, which I really love. I love that movie a lot. And then he also did. There's another one in there too, I think that he did, but he did Friday the 13th. So I wasn't surprised that it was like that. It was produced by Michael Bay and Platinum Dunes. And I liked what they did because while I liked the first Friday movie, the movie series has become about Jason, and people love Jason. So when I first heard like they're remaking Friday the 13th, I was like, oh, like I don't need to see another movie where Jason's mother is the killer. So how they did it, I thought was awesome. Is the opening credits are Friday the 13th Part 1, basically. You get all of that basically in the opening credits. Then they cut to what you're referring to, Wayne, the opening camp scene, which is basically Friday the 13th Part 2, where he's wearing a hood instead of a mask. And they basically cover that in like 15 minutes. And then they do like, 1 year later or whatever it's supposed to be. And they added a little tie-in where instead of killing one of the campers, he actually keeps her hostage, which I think other people didn't like that either because Jason never really did that. But that's where Jared Padalecki's character comes in. He's the brother of that girl. Maybe it's not a year later, but it's later. And so then that basically the rest of the movie from when he shows up is Friday the 13th Part 3. It unfortunately didn't get any sequels, and like I said, it's been wrapped up in legal battles for the last like 8 to 10 years or something like that. So I don't know when we'll see another one. So because that was so popular, it wasn't really popular, but because it made $50 million opening weekend for a movie like that, that's pretty huge. They greenlit Nightmare on Elm Street, the remake. So they cast Jackie
Earl
Haley as Freddy, which I don't have a problem with. I know a lot of people are upset. Obviously, everyone's like, why not Robert Englund? It's like, well, it's a remake. You want to do a different actor. So I got it. I understood what they were doing. And he's fine. He's a great actor. It was written poorly. They put back in the original Nightmare on Elm Street, there was supposed to be this backstory that he was a child molester, and that's why all the parents killed him. Well, they changed it because they wanted, it was a fun slasher movie. They didn't want it to be so dark. I know it sounds silly, but, making someone a child molester makes a movie that much more darker. Watch Little Children with Jackie Earle Haley. That's a great movie, and that's a great performance by him. That was a much better portrayal of someone who is a sex offender. This is like they introduced that back into the remake because that was Wes's original idea, and it really kind of takes you out of it a little bit, and it makes the character of Freddy less enjoyable. Because you're not going to root for a guy who's a pedophile. So it's just like, not that you would root for a child murderer either, but it makes it easier to stomach that he's not a pedophile in the original franchise. So now you've added that element into it. Apparently it was terrible to shoot. Rooney Mara had like an awful time making it. I've only watched it once, I think, and even that was in parts. I never sat through a whole viewing at one point. It's just that it just wasn't very good. That's the worst, I think, of the big remakes of those kind of slasher films. That's probably the worst. Where I would say Chainsaw is probably my favorite. That's probably the worst one. And that really kind of ended it, Wayne. That one too did well to open. It was like $35 million opening weekend, but then it tanked after that. So that, kind of killed a lot of those kind of remakes like that. At least for them to be done like that. What then opened up after that, which is where we're at now, is sequels. So you started getting more, sequels 20 years, 30 years, 40 years later in some cases of the same movie where they then erased all the other sequels. So you got Halloween did that, Candyman, which Candyman's a great slasher flick too. We've talked about that one before. The new one as well I really liked. And we're going to really dive into some of... no, we're not going to dive in. This isn't a spoiler. We're going to review Halloween Kills next weekend. Or next episode. So be ready for that. So we will obviously talk about this topic again in that podcast. But so they it's interesting they shied away from doing just straight up remakes anymore. And I wonder if that will ever come back, because things happen in the horror industry in trends. And that was the trend for like most of the 2000s. People wouldn't even realize that 13 Ghosts and House of Wax were remakes for the most part, but they were. And so was House on Haunted Hill. If I Googled it, I'm sure I could find like probably 30 to 40 films that were horror films from 2000 to 2010 that were remakes. That's just what they did. And a lot of times they didn't even want you to change it. They just wanted it to be a remake and just do the same thing that was done before because it was successful. But yeah, so it's just one of those things that I don't know if we'll see it again. Maybe we will. Hopefully they stick to doing more original remakes like the other ones I want to mention before we get to wrapping up the show here soon. Maniac, the original and the remake. Maniac's a 1980s slasher film about a guy who just kind of loses it and he goes around killing women. They remade it in, I'm not sure what year, but somewhat recently with Elijah Wood, where they turned it into almost like, it's from his point of view, like the whole movie, Wayne. So like the only time you see Elijah Wood is like in a mirror or in like reflections, which I thought was really cool. And that was that's a remake that they did, and they did something different with it. And I like the aspect of it.
That's very intriguing.
Yes, it's a really good movie. The Hatchet franchise. I love that franchise. There's Hatchet 1, 2, 3, and then Victor Crowley. So 4 of those movies. Those are just really fun, hilarious slasher films. They're not spoofs, but because Adam Green, the director, he looks at slasher films as being mostly funny. So he put a lot of excess gore in his film. And when you do that in slasher films, for the most part, you're going to make people laugh because it's so ridiculous. So I thought those were really good. One from the 80s I really liked that I remember watching it for the first time a couple years ago. It's called Final Exam. And it's an 80s movie, so I'm expecting like a cheesy 80s slasher film. Well, it starts off and I'm watching it and I'm like, wow, like this is really well written. And the acting is like really good. Like I don't hate any of these characters because they're all doing a really good job. And then the kills were cool. And I was just like, well, I was expecting not to like this movie as much as I did. And I was just like, geez, like this was a really well done slasher film in the 80s that I don't think people really know about. Let's see, The Prowler. That's Tom Savini did all the special effects for that one. That one was really cool. And then recently we had Christopher Landon who did Freaky and then Happy Death Day 1 and 2. So those are more horror comedies, but they are horror slashers. Freaky is a Freaky Friday slasher where the killer and the final girl switch places. And then Happy Death Day 1 and 2 are slashers that deal with like kind of time travel, and it's a Groundhog's Day setup. And then in the second one, it kind of like involves time travel. So that's a very interesting take on it as well. So I would recommend those for something more modern if you're looking for something like that. But those I thought were really good. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about in this category, Wayne?
No, not really, man. You are the expert. You have covered it extremely well.
All right, so we'll move on to. That's basically what I've been watching this week. I could go over here. Let me go over some of the horror films because I'm doing my 31 days of horror. No One Gets Out Alive on Netflix. I thought that was pretty good. It's a kind of. It's not really. It's kind of a ghost story. It's this girl, this immigrant, comes from Mexico, and they have like these boarding houses to live at, and she lives at one of them. Turns out that the guys that own it aren't very good people, and there's some sort of weird possessed demon butterfly box. Let's see, and then the other one Bingo Hell, So last year, Amazon dumped 4 movies straight to Blumhouse. Blumhouse dumped 4 movies straight to Amazon because of the pandemic. So they kept that this year. They decided to do 4 new movies and kind of make it a thing. So 4 new horror movies hit Amazon Prime. One of them is Bingo Hell, directed by Gigi Saul Guerrero. And it reminded me a lot of Demon Knight from the 90s. It's the Tales from the Crypt Demon Knight. It was really fun. Lots of gooiness and blood and just silliness. It's an old folks community, kind of, that is taken over by a demon played by Richard Brake, who turns their bingo hall into like this extravagant looking thing, but really he's just using it to steal their souls. So I thought it was a really fun movie. That's on Amazon Prime. And then the other one I watched yesterday, the original Mummy from 1932. I had never seen it before. It was fine. I didn't love it or anything, but Boris Karloff is pretty awesome. I will say I prefer the Brendan Fraser version. A lot more action-packed and a lot more fun. I do enjoy that the Universal monster movies are really short, though. That's something I like, because they're easy to get through them. Anything, Wayne, that you've watched this week before you lost internet?
Oh, goodness. Not really too much going on in the movie, the watching this week for me. Still working my way through Friends.
Yeah.
I ended up streaming The 40-Year-Old Virgin just because I needed something to mindlessly giggle at, and that's always fun to revisit. Other than that, no, not much. Not much in the horror genre yet either.
Okay. So I can't remember if I mentioned it or not, but I'll talk a little bit about Midnight Mass, Mike Flanagan's new Netflix series that started out as a fake book in a couple of his movies that he did. And then he decided to turn it into an actual limited series on Netflix. It stars his wife, Katie Siegel. Zach Gilford from Friday Night Lights is really good at it, too. I've seen him in a few other things, and I'm like, maybe he's just not that great of an actor. But I saw him in this, and I was like, holy shit. Like, he brought it to another level. He's really good at it. It's this small, like, fisherman-type town that's away from the big city. You got to take a boat to get to the mainland, where the big city is. He is an he got drunk and killed somebody, so he was in prison. So he gets out of prison. Zach Gilford goes home to the island where his dad, Henry Thomas, and his mom and his brother are all living there. And this preacher comes to town, and I don't want to give away any spoilers, but their old preacher left. And this guy came back, and he said, hey, he's in the mainland in the hospital. He's not doing too great. He's probably not going to make it. I'm the new preacher. Weird shit starts to happen. It's very much about, monologues, which can seem boring at times, but they're actually really interesting. It's basically, people, giving, their own stories, and it's handled really interesting, I think, and the camera work is pretty incredible. The cinematography is pretty awesome. If you've seen something like Malignant, where they make very good use of no ceilings and whatnot, they do that in Midnight Mass too. Nice big wide shots of the island and stuff, and even sometimes just inside a place. There's this one room where they go for Alcoholics Anonymous, and it's only 2 people, and they're sitting in the middle of the room, and it's shot very wide. It's a very interesting looking show. I really like it. It's not. He did 2 shows. I still haven't seen Bly Manor, but he did The Haunting of Hill House, which I loved. It's amazing. But it's not like that. It's a different show. It seems to be more personal to him. He's even said as much. But if you haven't seen Midnight Mass, it's 7 episodes, I think, and they're about an hour each. So you can get through it in a weekend. That's how we watched it. I think we did Saturday and Sunday a couple weeks ago, the weekend it came out. But I really liked that. I thought that was a really good show. So check that one out if you haven't seen it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so on to the news of the week. Ridley Scott producing true crime flick The Boston Strangler starring Keira Knightley. Disney Plus greenlight series from Melvin Marr, Kevin Yu, and Jake Kasdan called American Born Chinese. It'll be directed by Destin Daniel Cretton, who directed Shang-Chi. There's a rumor that Blade will release October 7th, 2022, so that's about a year ahead of schedule. It has not been confirmed by Marvel yet, but there's Marvel India released a poster of all the upcoming Marvel movies from this year and next year, and that was on there, so that's a very interesting rumor. The Batman sequel gets greenlit before the first one is even released, so I guess that's the movie's looking good, I would imagine, on from Warner Brothers' point of view. Bailey Bass from upcoming Avatar 2 will play Claudia, originated by Kirsten Dunst in AMC's Interview with the Vampire. Mike Flanagan, we just talked about him, is working on another TV show for Netflix. This one is going to be based on the fall of the House of Usher from Edgar Allan Poe. Robert Carlyle returning to role of Begbie from Trainspotting in new TV show called The Blade Artist. L.A. Law sequel series starring Blair Underwood, who was an original cast member of the original show, gets a pilot order from ABC. Jamie Clayton from Sense8 is going to play Pinhead in the new Hellraiser movie which will be releasing on Hulu. She is transgender, so it'll be the first main transgender actress to play a major horror villain. And Pinhead is not his real name, by the way, people, so just in case you're wondering. That's just what he's been known to be called because of what he looks like. Bill Skarsgård and Samara Weaving are going to star in Boy Kills World from producers Roy Lee and Sam Raimi. Jake Gyllenhaal to star in adaptation of Rob Liefeld's comic Prophet. WandaVision spin-off in the works starring Kathryn Hahn as Agatha Harkness. It'll obviously air on Disney Plus. It's supposed to be more of a dark comedy. That 90s show, Wayne, is being made at Netflix. Red and Kitty returning as grandparents of Eric and Donna's kid. Red, you want to comment on that one?
While I have high hopes for it, I'm going to go in cautiously because they tried to do that 80s show with a completely different cast, I believe. And
yeah, there was no real connection except the creators of it. That was it.
So if Red and Kitty can recapture that magic, it's going to be fantastic. I did read something in regards to this where Topher Grace and Laura Prepon will pop up for an episode or two, maybe. So that's always exciting, and it would be great for nostalgia's sake. So yeah. I hope it works out, but I'm not gonna bank on it.
Yeah, we'll see. They already gave it 10 episodes, so it'll be 10 episodes at Netflix sometime next year, I'm guessing. Topher Grace's Home Economics on ABC is actually a good show. People should watch that one. Just a side note there. Cillian Murphy is going to play John Oppenheimer, the creator of the atomic bomb, in Christopher Nolan's movie about Oppenheimer. We talked about a couple weeks ago that movie was happening, so there's your star. Release is coming soon. Tick, Tick, Boom, a musical starring Andrew Garfield and directed by Lin-Manuel Miranda, hits Netflix November 19th. It is based on the creator of the musical Rent, so it's like his life story, but told through a musical. Seems pretty fitting, I guess. Peacemaker TV show was going to hit HBO Max in January, officially, starring John Cena. Hypnotic, starring Kate Siegel from Haunting of Hill House, Hush, and Midnight Mass, also the wife of Mike Flanagan. She has a new movie, which hits Netflix October 27th. Again, it's called Hypnotic. Deaths this week: Cynthia Harris, Mad About You, dead at 87. Alan Coulter, longtime Letterman announcer, dead at 78. And Melissa Yandel Smith, I think she actually died last month from Nomadland. She played Frances McDormand's sister in that movie last year. She's dead at 64. All right, so that's our show for this week, guys. Sorry it was a little different. We didn't do reviews this week, but we're going to do more reviews next week. We're going to have a special guest next week. We're going to talk all about one of my favorite directors. I'm going to leave you guys, let you think about who that might be. But it's going to be just a really fun and super loaded show next week. It'll probably go long next week. This one actually went longer than I expected. Thank you for listening, everybody. Wayne and I appreciate all the love that we get online and the amount of people that download our show over the last year and a half or so, how many months it's been since we hit our year. And we just, we look forward to doing this every week. It's just a lot of fun. So thank you guys for listening to Now Showing with Mike and Wayne.